Jamen, så vil vi hoppe videre til næste oplægsholder, som jo så netop er Kurt Menke. Det bliver sådan en blanding af engelsk og dansk, det her. Men hans titel det er Displaying and Animating Mesh Weatherdata in QGIS. Og oplægget vil blive holdt på engelsk, selvom jeg ved godt, at Line drillede lidt og sagde, at det kunne han da sagtens gøre på dansk. Men ja, så længe har han ikke været herovre endnu, tænker jeg. Kurt Menke er GIS-konsulent og har haft sin egen forretning i over 20 år i USA, og er nu flyttet her til Danmark, hvor han er begyndt at arbejde sammen med Septima, Septima. Han er analytiker, korttegner, underviser og forfatter, og arbejder meget for at udbrede open source. Han har også udgivet flere bøger, og blandt andet hans 5. og 6. bog er lige kommet på hylderne med Discover QGIS 3 og QGIS for Hydrological Applications. Han står for QGIS certifikationsprogrammet og har også hjulpet til med at starte en QGIS-gruppe, en QGIS Brugergruppe på den anden side af søen. Så er han OSGeo Charter member og har været det siden 2015. Så det, som vi skal høre om, det er support til mesh data og Temporal Controller. Så vi skal se lidt på, hvordan man arbejder med værdata i mesh, og får det ind i QGIS og kan lave smukke, som man skriver, visualiseringer. Og det ser jeg rigtig meget frem til også. Så Kurt, will you take over and it's yours.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about displaying and animating mesh weather data in QGIS. And it's really exciting to be here as part of the QGIS Brugergruppe here in Denmark. I've only been here for 6 weeks, just hired by Septima and started 2 weeks ago. So this is exciting, and I'm excited to become more a part of this user group. I do a mix of spatial analysis, cartography, and teaching. I'm a QGIS certified instructor, and as was mentioned, I'm an OSGeo Charter member. And when I was in the US, I was one of the ones who got the US QGIS user group started and was the voting member of that. So like I said, I'm excited to become part of the Danish QGIS user group now. These are the 2 books that Michael mentioned: QGIS for Hydrological Applications, Recipes for Catchment Hydrology and Water Management, that I wrote with my Dutch colleague Hans van der Kwast, and Discover QGIS 3X on the right, which is a big 400-page workbook that's a very broad treatment of all the capabilities of QGIS, and they're available from Locate Press, so a shameless plug there. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about weather mesh data, and along the way, I'm going to introduce a couple new features, well, at least new since I published Discover QGIS 3X. And one of those new features is new mesh vector renderers that were introduced at 3.12 about a year ago. And then the other is the Temporal Controller, which was introduced at QGIS 3.14 Pi last summer. So a little bit about mesh data, if you're not familiar with it. Mesh data is a hybrid data model. So it's a collection of vertices, edges, and faces, a lot like TINs, if you're familiar with those. And it's used for meteorological, hydrological, and oceanographic data sets and other model outputs, typically. So a mesh data file can contain multiple data sets. So for example, in the data that I'm going to be working with in this demo, it contains wind, temperature, and precipitation values, as well as time. So it's really interesting data to work with. And I really love the data visualization features of QGIS, and I was excited when mesh data began supported. And this is an animation that I put together for some of the 2017 hurricane season in the Atlantic, where there were several Category 5 hurricanes that went through and wreaked havoc on the Caribbean islands and Florida. And I wanted to see for this talk what I could do with some of the data from some big Danish storms. So that's what we're going to look at. So the storms that we're going to focus on is Stormen Bodil, which hit Denmark in December of 2013. And a little trivia on this one, it's the first officially named storm in Denmark. The other one I'll look at is the December hurricane, which was also coined Adam at the time, unofficially. And this was in 1999. And there were 51 meter per second wind gusts recorded before the anemometer blew over. And this is the highest wind speed ever measured on Danish soil. So these are the two storms we will explore. And the data that I'm going to use comes from the Copernicus Climate Data Store, and specifically this data pool called the ERA5 hourly data on single levels. So I'm going to get out of this, and we're going to do a demo for most of the rest of the talk. And I want to start by, whoops, let me move that out. Looking at let me find the right tab here. Let me get this zoom control out of the way. So this is the website that is going to be the source of the data for the talk. And if I click on data sets here, you'll see the whole rich series of data sets that are contained on this site. So if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see some of the other ERA5 data on pressure levels. We're looking for, ERA5 hourly data on single levels from 1979 to present. They have this data actually all the way back to 1950. They have it broken into 2 data pools. Where's it? Anyway, I'm not gonna, when you click on one of these, you basically get a nice overview of the data and then a link to download the data. And for the data that we're going to be working with, I had selected temperature, wind, and precipitation. And for these, when you scroll down to the bottom, you can select specific time periods. So I selected just the windows that these storms hit, the specific month, year, and time. And I selected 24 time periods through a day, so hourly data for each of these storms. And then down here, I was able to just specify the spatial envelope of what I wanted to download and focus it just on Denmark, which made it a fairly small download, and it came as a GRIB file. So I have QGIS up now, and it's a simple map document with just country boundaries. And what I'm going to do is add data that I downloaded from Bodil, and you'll see the GRIB file here in the browser panel. You can simply drag and drop to add it to QGIS. And if you haven't worked with mesh data, if you open up the data source manager, you'll notice that there's also a tab for mesh data that you can use to browse for mesh data sets as well. So when this comes in, this is just the default color ramp. I'm going to reorder things so you still see the country boundaries. And you'll notice right away that there's a little clock here in the layers panel in the indicator space that indicates that this is a temporal layer. So I'm using 316. And so if you're using greater than 314 and you have the temporal controller functionality, it picks up on the temporal component of mesh data automatically. I'm going to be using the layer styling panel, and you'll notice that when you're working with a mesh data set, you get some slightly different looking options than you would with raster or vector data. And this left-hand tab here shows that we have wind, temperature, and precipitation aspects of this data. And we're going to be working with the wind in this demo. And over here we have this kind of colored block. That's the raster component that we're looking at on the screen in these purple colors. So we can start by making that look a little better. So I'll click on the contour tab, and I'm just going to change the color ramp to red, yellow, blue. And the default color ramp needs to be inverted because now it's showing the low wind speeds as red, and we want the low wind speeds to be blue. So I'm going to right click on this and invert the color ramp. So it's looking a little better now. And you can also go in here and adjust the max stretch on here so that you get slightly more saturated colors when we get into what the storm looks like. So the next thing we'll look at is the vector data. So if I switch back to this first tab, I can click on that little arrow to activate the vectors, and you'll see all these wind vectors appear on the map. And I can adjust those by clicking on this vector tab. And the first thing I'll do with these is change the color to like a nice dark blue so that they're visible but aren't dominating the map so much. And with these arrows, you can also control the spacing. So I can activate display on user grid and make it a little coarser than that default 15 by 15 pixels. And then another thing I really like to do is down under arrow length is change that from defined by min max to scaled to magnitude. And this will scale the arrows to be the same, to be bigger arrows where there's higher wind speeds and smaller arrows for lower wind speeds. And instead of this factor of 10, I'm going to reduce it down to like a factor of 2 so that it's a little nicer to look at. So you can see out here we have some bigger wind speeds with bigger arrows, and over Denmark, the smaller arrows where the wind speeds are lower. And so let's look at the temporal controller now that we're looking at this wind speed. If I click on this indicator for temporal controller, in layer properties, there's a temporal tab, and it displays the time range that our data set is set up with. And I'm going to activate the temporal controller panel and activate time. And this is the time range of our data set right here. You can also go to this setting and make sure it's set to Bodil, to just the min-max time in that data set. And now I'll click to the fixed animation frame, which gives you these forward and backward buttons. And so with this, we can start using the slider or the buttons to slide through in time until we start seeing where this storm is starting to hit, which is right about in there where we're starting to get the higher winds starting to approach Denmark. So with this, I want to show you some of the other options for these vectors. The arrows are nice, but last summer they added a couple more options for this. So first off, instead of arrows, we can show this vector data as streamlines. And usually I find these can be a little overwhelming. You can certainly adjust that by changing the spacing on here. But the one I'm going to use today that I really have become fond of is the traces option. So this shows the winds as kind of nice flowing traces that really give a nice visual effect. Look at my notes. So the other thing is, and down here, this is the full extent. I downloaded basically 4 or 5 days of data for the storm because I wasn't sure exactly when it hit and when it exited Denmark. So I can go in here and I can adjust the overall dates to something that's a little more tightly confined around the storm actually hitting Denmark. So starting on December 5th and instead of the 3rd, and at the high end, setting this to the 7th. And then I could go back to the beginning and I could hit the play button to begin having QGIS play this animation. It's a little jerky like this, but we can start to see it changing, and it's changing here. Every frame is 1 hour. It's 1 hour of data, and we can adjust this to make it go faster, to have each frame be a larger piece of time. So now we're seeing the storm passing over Denmark. And so this is nice. I'm going to pause it. One thing that we didn't get with this temporal controller yet that we used to have with the time manager plugin is the ability to label time on the map. But there's a nice quick way to do that. I'm going to add a point data set. So I'm going to go to layer, create layer. I'm going to create a new temporary scratch layer. I'm going to call this layer time. And I'll make it a point layer. And I'm not going to add any attributes, but I will put it in the same CRS as the rest of the data, and click OK. So now I have this time layer, and I'm going to simply digitize a point where I want the timestamp to appear on the map. And then I can put this out of edit mode. And with this, the first thing I'm going to do is change it from single symbol to no symbols, because I don't want to see the point. I just want to label it with the time. So the point goes away and I switch to the labels tab, and I'll set that to single labels. And we don't have any attributes, but I'm going to use an expression to put time on the map. So in the expression dialog, if I search for time, you'll see that there are some variables associated with the temporal controller map end and start time. So these are the start times at the beginning and ending of each frame. So I can use map start time to place the timestamp of the current time on the map, but it's not really formatted the way I would like. So I can go back into that and use the format time function to put, or format date rather, to put this into a format that's more to my liking. I already have this on my clipboard. I'll just close the parentheses. So I've put in here hour, hour, day, day, month, 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 year, 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 so that I get a nice formatted time the way I want to see it. So I'm seeing the hour, the day, the month, and the year right here on the map. So now as I play it, I do have the time advancing on the label there. It's going every 3 hours since I have it set to that. And if you wanted to make an animation, say using GIMP, the way you do that is you, like an actual animated GIF, you can use this export animation button to animate, to export a series of still images that you can then stitch together. And when we're working in the temporal controller, we're working in this map canvas. And so we don't have the benefit of things in the print composer, like being able to add a title. But we do have decorations that we can use for that. So I can go to the view menu to decorations and choose title label and just type in the name of the storm here. And you have options for font and background color and position, and I can click OK. And so now I have a title on my map canvas that would get exported with the map. Another thing you can do with decorations that's nice is add a scale bar, north arrow. I'm going to add an image, which could be a logo. The default one in QGIS is the QGIS logo, so that's fine. I'll just click OK to accept that. Now I have a QGIS logo in the lower left. And if I wanted to export this out and create an animation, I'd click that button and choose the folder, click map canvas extent. I could specify the output, height and width in pixels, the date range, and anything else. And it would export all my still frames. And I'll talk about how to do that in GIMP near the end. So that's this first storm. I'm going to now take a look at the second storm. Whoops. So this is the December hurricane from '99. And I've added it to the map, but I'm not seeing it. And that's simply because I have the temporal controller activated and it's set to the time frame for Bodil, not the December hurricane. So I'm going to go click on this middle temporal controller button and tell it to set the time range to the December hurricane. And now I see that data. And I'm going to use this to show you one other option on styling. Here, what I'm going to do is turn off the contours and just show the vectors on top. And I'm going to make the vectors white, and you'll see why in a minute, and I'll make them traces again. And now I'm going to turn on the Google satellite. And this is nice because I can do a nice animation that shows, the white streamlines over the dark background. And if I get into the middle here, you'll see the vortex for this December hurricane, which I would have to also change in my decorations so that it's properly labeled. And now I have a map that I could use to export an animation of that storm's data. So you can see it's pretty quick and easy to both obtain the data and start working with it in QGIS from this data pool at Copernicus. So I want to show you the results of exporting these out. So I used GIMP to create some animations from both of these storms. And it's very simple. There's only 3 steps. You open up GIMP, you go to File, Open as Layers, and you open up all the individual PNGs that you exported from QGIS. You then go to the Filter menu to Animation and choose Optimize for GIF. And finally, then you just export the GIF. And when you get to the Export Image as GIF, there's some options there. And I chose, made sure I checked as animation. I chose Loop Forever. And you can set a delay between frames to basically speed up or slow down the animation. I set it at nearly half a second. And then you can use that delay for all the frames. So those are the settings that I put in. And so this is the animation of the storm Bodil. So you can see as it passes over Denmark, both the intensity of the wind and the direction of the wind. So really nice graphics. This is the December hurricane, and this one really had a really strong vortex that goes over northern Jutland that we can see with the mesh traces. And finally, I put one together of just the white traces over the Google satellite base map to kind of show how you can make just a simpler visualization of just the wind without the contours being part of it. So that's what I wanted to show, and I think we have a few moments for questions.
We do indeed, and you're well within your time. So thank you very much. Now I have to stop my watch. So, right, let's go to the chat and see if there are any questions.
Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to find the chat.
Yeah, it's in the bottom.
Yeah,
it's a small menu there. Well, there's a comment. Awesome.
There we go. Okay. I should mention that it's also in QGIS, if you're going to use the print composer, a new feature in the print composer is that there are settings for temporal data. So if you're using the temporal controller, you can basically go into the print composition and set your map frame to a specific period of time within that data set so that you can make a print composition. And I'm pretty sure you could use the atlas to export a series of map images from the print composer at different timestamps using expressions to generate an animation out of the print composer too, although I haven't actually tried that.
Yes. So now I'm just waiting for somebody to hire me to do that. Otherwise, I'll have to do it in the evening myself. Okay, questions coming in.
Okay, one question. What kind of analysis apart from visualization can you do with mesh data? It is possible. Mesh data usually is for visualization. It's usually good for showing the output of some of hydrologic models that may be developed in things like HECRAS, where you can show flooding scenarios, what happens to a landscape with increased water inundation, and you can actually use the mesh data to show that. And so there are some processing tools in QGIS now that allow you to create your own mesh data sets from other raster sources or generated in another piece of software, a modeling software that can show that. And it says, one question we could never answer is risk or falling in relation to weather changes, frost first day versus a period of frost, would that be manageable in QGIS? We have time injury data since 1980, although not with XY except for traffic injuries. Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be, I don't know what variables will be involved in that kind of analysis, and I'm not sure mesh would necessarily need to be involved, but I'm sure that that's something that could be modeled in QGIS. Yeah, so in principle, you could have a mesh for the city, absolutely. And you could generate that from a variety of different input data sets with some of the processing tools that are now available. And what I created for the animations was a GIF, GIF.
Jeg havde også stillet et spørgsmål, men det var ikke til dig, Kurt. Det var til de andre. Er der nogen, der har erfaring i download af data fra DMI? Sorry, Kurt, it wasn't for you. It was for the... I know you haven't downloaded data from DMI.
Nej, nej.
Actually not.
Hvis jeg må komme med en kommentar, det er Jens Lauritsen. Vi har prøvet tidligere at få fat i Weatherdata, og vi skulle betale forfærdeligt meget for det. Jeg tænker, vi skal have kigget på den der side, han nævner.
Ja, men de danske DMI-data er blevet frigivet, men jeg var spændt på, om der var nogen, der havde prøvet det derinde, fordi de er blevet frigivet, også tilbage i tiden. Så.
Der kommer en kommentar her fra Mads, der siger, at jeg har downloadet vandstanddata og forecast.
Okay.
Så. Men ja, det er jo et kæmpe bibliotek af data, der venter på os der.
Yeah, I should also mention there is a plugin called Grib Downloader that you can use to download weather data for your map extent in QGIS.
And from Jesper, could the traces be paired with another layer so that they would change color with locations where they were destructive?
Yeah, yes, but I think you could probably do that with different blending modes, perhaps, because you can apply blending modes to the mesh traces, and so there could be some underlying layer that they would interact with to pull off an effect like that, perhaps.
Okay. Og så har vi et par observationer, at det er sket, og Region Midt, CDC-projektet har brugt data fra DMI. Så, men ja, igen kommentar om, der ligger rigtig meget data og venter på os. Ja. Er der andre spørgsmål? Jeg har lige et par minutter endnu. Ellers så vil vi gå videre. So while we're waiting, Kurt, maybe you could make Pavel the next presenter or the next host. If
I changed
me, you already host, yeah. So maybe you could do that.
Yes, it's done now.
Yes. Where can you buy the book?
Locatepress.com.
There's a note here. Søren Johansen is occasionally putting out DMI data on Twitter. So.
Cool. And I will say that I just want everyone to know I am learning Danish, and next time I hope to present in Danish, but I didn't want to subject everyone to that today.
Well, all right. Okay, hvis der ikke er flere spørgsmål, ja. Vi glæder os, Kurt. Velkommen til. Godt. Så vil vi gå videre. Så har vi Paul